Yo, yo, yo.
Hello, everyone.
What's up, everybody? Live streaming Actuali, where we endeavor to change this world from the inside out. And we're happy that you all have joined us for this new episode of Actuali Podcast. Today we are diving into episode 12 of John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And it's going to be awesome. We're getting into part 2 of higher states of consciousness now, and it's going to get really, really interesting. I'm excited. So, how do you enjoy last episode?
I enjoyed thoroughly. It's starting to get into the world that, I guess in a way I'm a little bit more familiar with, like directly. A somewhat experienced psychonaut, at least back in the day.
Yeah, he actually gets into some interesting psilocybin studies in this episode and breaks down exactly what is happening in the brain that is causing these higher states of consciousness to occur that are also akin to the higher states that we find through yoga and meditation and fasting and many other techniques. That, what did he call it? That onto normativity, that super real sense of existence. I'm just trying to make sure that I get this shared up and to all the places.
Yeah, the realer than real, and why do we accept these altered states of consciousness more than, say, like we do a dream? Because like a dream is, somewhere you go, something happens, it feels real in the moment, but then you wake up, you say, well, now feels realer than the dream, so discard the dream as real. But with higher states of consciousness, it's quite the opposite. And then you can't really explain it either, that ineffability of the experience. And,
no, it is. It's indescribable, beyond words.
Because it's knowledge
realer than real. It's like waking up from a dream.
Yeah.
It's like waking up from reality into the real reality.
Remembering, as in remembering, becoming a member of.
Yes.
That
This
experience.
sense of like a deeper sense of home than you've ever known. That's like ultra familiar. So yeah, we're going to be getting into that and much, much more. And looks like we are good here. So let's go ahead and get rolling, guys. Let me get my software working here.
Do it, software. You can do it.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So we have been engaged in a very long discussion because we're talking about a topic that is central about the possibility of enlightenment and to try and make that something plausibly accessible to us rather than something wrapped and shrouded in mesmeric mystique. Instead, we've been trying to understand this from a cognitive science perspective that could tell us why these higher states of consciousness might in fact provide a means for the radical self-transformation, self-transcendence, enhanced inner peace and connectedness to reality that are the central legacy of the axial age revolution and that are still needed today, even if we no longer believe in the mythology of the axial age religions and philosophies. How do we find a place to vouchsafe the value, the precious value that these states can confer on lives in terms of meaning and transcendence when we no longer can understand and articulate and legitimate that in terms of a two worlds mythology? So if you remember, we had been discussing the properties of these higher states of consciousness. We had discussed what the world is like. It's a bright, both comprehensive and detailed, intricate and interesting, the world in a grain of sand. It's highly intelligible, it's beautiful, and behind it is a pervasive sense of oneness. The self that is resonating with that world in the higher state of consciousness is a self deeply at peace. Like in Plato's description of anagoge. It's experiencing joy. It's experiencing a kind of deep remembrance, sati, of the being mode, its true and authentic self. It is losing its egocentrism. We talked about the connectedness between the self and the world as one so intimate, so flowing, so anagogic, that the sense of participation and conformity is achieving a sense of identity, deep and profound, being at one with the oneness. But that it is so profound that it is almost always described as ineffable. We then took a look at what might be going on in these states, because we're trying to give a descriptively adequate and a prescriptively adequate account. We took a look at the continuity hypothesis, that the same machinery that's at work in our everyday experience of the fluency of reading into the moments of insight, into the insight cascades of flow, and then being exapted even more into mystical experience. And then some of those mystical experiences bring about a quantum change, right? They bring about a deep transformative experience. And I proposed to you that what's going on in these higher states of consciousness is something like a state of flow, but that the skill, the expertise that is flowing is not this particular skill of rock climbing or being a martial artist or playing jazz. It's the skill, the domain general skill of getting an optimal grip on the world. And so what's happening is people are getting a flow state in their ability to optimally grip on the world. This connection to the machinery of insight helps to explain why disruptive strategies are used in order to try and bring about the higher states of consciousness, because disruptive strategies are so central to trying to create insight. They're both naturally disruptive strategies, and you can acquire them through mindfulness psychotechnologies. We were examining what these disruptive strategies do. They massively increase variation in your processing, and that reveals invariance, both good invariance. You get to see more of the real patterns that are remaining unchanged through all the variation. That's what science does. Across all of their variations, we try to find the real patterns that are invariant. And what science does is increase the variation. We run experiments. We increase the variation. We do all kinds of manipulations and increased variations to try and find what remains invariant, because we take that to point out to us what is more real. That's what you're doing. But it also, so it's opening up the invariance of the world, and you're using the flow state's capacity for enhanced implicit processing, implicit learning of complex patterns, tracking of causal patterns to do that. But it's also picking up on the bad invariance. It's picking up on, it's helping to reveal all the ways in which you are systematically misframing. So that like a child going through a developmental stage, and I would point you to the work of my former student and friend, colleague Junsun Kim, for this idea of development as a systematic form of insight, something that he and I are working on together. Like a child going through a developmental stage, realizing not just this error or that error, but a systematicity in the way that they're misframing reality and finding a nexus, a point of where the insight, is not just an intervention in this problem, but in a whole class and type of problems. That developmental change of seeing through illusion and into reality that is so central to wisdom is also being afforded by these higher states of consciousness. What about the decentering that's so central to both flow, mystical experiences, and then ultimately to higher states of consciousness? My colleague, Igor Grossman, has produced quite a bit of good experimental evidence that such decentering strategies, although this was prefigured in earlier work by the Berlin paradigm, Igor Grossman has done some excellent work on showing that such decentering strategies are very relevant for bringing about wisdom. He has work on what he calls the Solomon effect. Let me describe it to you, and you'll see why these disruptive decentering strategies can be so powerful. Get people to find a problem that's very messy, problematic, and that they're stuck in. Usually it's an interpersonal problem, because as Sartre said, hell is other people. So is heaven, by the way. He didn't say that. But right, our deepest and most pervasive problems are generally problems with other people. Why? Because the thing that is, I've mentioned this before, that is most predictive of how meaningful your life is your meaningful relationships to others. The problem is human beings are endlessly complex. Okay? So you're describing this interpersonal problem, and when people describe it, they are, of course, mesmerized by the mirage of their own egocentric perspective. They describe it without thought, default, from the first-person perspective, and they remain stuck. Remember this notion of stuckness. We'll come back to it again when we talk about Gnosis and Gnosticism. Then you get the person to re-describe the same problem from the third-person perspective. You get them to decenter. What will often happen is they will break frame. They will realize the way in which they have been blocked, systematically locked in not solving their problem. They'll often have a central insight into how to resolve their problem. This is why it's called the Solomon effect, because it tends to make you more wise. Think about the radical decentering that's going on in these awakening experiences, in these higher states of consciousness. Notice the systematicity of the error of egocentrism. It's not an error in this problem, or this problem, or this problem. It's a systematic error. That's why it's often described with metaphors of like being asleep. Because when you wake up, you have a systematic change in your consciousness. So what's happening in these higher states of consciousness, in these awakening experiences, you're getting a transformation, an intervention in systematic error. You're seeing through illusion precisely because of the powerful decentering that they are affording for you. Now that, of course, can be a powerfully traumatic experience. It can be a terrifying experience. Pursuing this in an autodidactic fashion, like all autodidactic, being a completely self-taught, right, is very, very dangerous. Autodidacts tend to get into echo chambers, vicious circles of their own egocentric entombment and entrapment. The Buddha gives a wonderful parable about this. He says, this is how you catch a monkey. You put some pitch on a piece of wood, and it looks like something very shiny and tasty. It's salient, it's attractive. And so the monkey grabs it with its hand, and it gets stuck. And then it uses its other hand to try and free itself, and it gets stuck. So it uses its right foot, and then its left foot, and then it puts its head, its mouth on, and then it's completely trapped, and then the hunter comes and kills it. Okay? But decentering can alleviate that. But if you are still pursuing this as an isolated individual, as an autodidact, then think about how ill-prepared, unskilled, untutored, and egocentrically you are trying to confront this radical transformation. That is why I think it is a very poor idea for people to take psychedelics without having them placed within a wisdom tradition in which they have a committed community that can give outside, decentering, and wise advice for how to process and handle these transformations. But once again, I point to you to an aspect of the meaning crisis. We have institutions of information, we have institutions of knowledge, we have traditions, and we have respected experts who give us guidance. We do not have this for wisdom. Now, what is amazing, of course, is that some individuals like Siddhartha are able to do it as individuals. I want to point out two things about that. They deserve our admiration for successfully doing it as individuals, even though the Buddha had training from other people all along the way. But we should not take from that some kind of promotion of our North American individualism. Because the Buddha made it very clear that the Sangha, or the community, was necessary for the cultivation of these transformative states. So, you've got this radical decentering. It can afford wisdom. And I want to try and show you how it's not just a perspectival knowing, it's not just a radical transformation in our salience landscape. This is a participatory change. This involves not just the machinery of cognition or the machinery of consciousness. This alters the machinery of the self, and therefore is also fundamentally a transformation of character. Remember, participatory knowing is knowing by conforming. Well, the radical at oneness of these brings about a radical kind of participatory knowing. Right? We'll come back to this when we return and talk about Plotinus. But right, it's so beautiful precisely because the coupling is so profound. And think about, you're getting reciprocal revelation. The world is revealing itself more deeply, and more depths of yourself are being revealed in a coupled fashion. Well, that's love. Love is mutually accelerating disclosure. If you want somebody, if you want to fall in love with somebody, although you can never sort of pursue it that way, I think. But what happens is, if you get two people mutually disclosing from each other in a coupled fashion, I honestly disclose something about myself, and then you in response disclose. And then I pick that up and disclose more, and then you disclose. That reciprocal, enhanced, mutual conforming engenders love. And love is something you know by participating in it, like your culture and your language. This is knowing by loving.
Knowing by loving.
I really like that definition he used. Love is mutually accelerating disclosure.
Yeah, man. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
World revealing. So the transcendent experience is so beautiful, so profound, in that they're world revealing and self-revealing at once in a coupled fashion. A participatory knowing, radical participatory knowing, like an inter-knowing almost, with the world, other people. Everything becomes this interconnected flow that is feeding in on itself, and yeah, it's just revealing.
So I want to bring up
Love that.
what he said in his recap of last week's episode about this flow state in the altered states is not necessarily skilled based in the sense of like, or mastery or expertise within a skill. Like, say, if you're like going into the flow state as an athlete or going into the flow state as a musician or whatever, this is the flow state of having an optimal grip on the world.
Yes.
So it's,
and that's just one aspect of the transcendent or the higher state of consciousness experience. Is that so we have the pervasive sense of oneness, the sense of deep, profound identity with the world, this indescribable inevitability about it, a quantum change that can occur in one's character and one's sense of experience and relation with the world.
and by quantum change we mean
Quite
the
total,
idea of higher states of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, bad term, but really good concept.
Yeah, but it's very immersive
Yep.
understanding, and this comes about because of and that's right. It's like the transcendent experience is akin to a flow state of an optimal grip
Yeah.
on reality. Yeah, I love that.
And it functions like science, like what he was saying, which finds the invariant within all the different variants.
That's what it does. It gives us disruptive strategies that reveal the real patterns that are invariant in the world and in ourselves.
And it exposes the systemic errors, the errors that happen consistently through all the changes as well. And you're doing this in a very, like you said, participatory way. Like you're doing it.
It's a whole chain of interconnected problems. Like the ego is that kind of total systemic misframing of reality. So when we're decentering from the egocentric first person perspective to an allocentric third person, we are allowing ourselves to have more meaningful engagement, a deeper sense of meaning in life, and deeper meaningful engagement with other people interpersonally.
And he brought up the Solomon effect, which is
sorry to cut you off there. Yeah, the Solomon effect. That's right, interpersonal. I just wanted to say there while we were talking about that systematic error. It's a systematic error of egocentrism that is becoming apparent.
And it affects everything. That's why it's systematic.
Comes in, right?
It's not just a problem with your personality or just a problem with one thing or another. It's all the things are affected by.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we become aware through the Solomon effect that allows us to become more wise.
Yeah, and so the Solomon effect is like if you have like a messy situation between, like usually between two people, an interpersonal thing where it's like me versus them.
Right.
What you get is the individuals involved have an introspective bias, an ego bias, seeing it from their inside, looking out, how I feel about this and how, and what you do is you then re-ask the question or have them re-describe the situation, but from a third person, like an objective standpoint, and the effect you get being able to see the own errors within your arguments and your feelings is the Solomon effect. I'm gonna have to remember that term, the Solomon effect, because it's good to just do that.
It's beautiful how it reveals itself through the course of a psychedelic trip as Vervaeke goes on further in this episode. That inner realization.
Of
that systematic error that can occur, and so the intervention that the systematic errors allow is what allows us to decenter, to break frame, to gain new insight, and through that insight actually solve our deepest problems, so we can actually allow for resolutions to occur. Now these realization, the comprehension of these systemic errors, it can be traumatic. Some of it initially can feel terrifying to the ego, can also be transcendent, blissful, reviving, like revolutionary, like an inner revolution, revitalizing, reawakening.
Yeah.
So we understand psychedelics and a wisdom tradition is what we're missing today.
And that's the dangers of the autodidact. Being an autodidact, and I to a certain degree am on that kind of spectrum, because most of the things I get interested, I have to teach myself, and then I figured out how to use the internet and
we must find the
people.
others.
Yes, people with more knowledge than you and learn from them. But the entrapment with, I think he used the term rabbit holes, but if you don't have a tradition of finding the wisdom behind or using wisdom to find what's true, you're more likely to be pulled into, like say like the flat earth end of things, or the ancient aliens end of thing. And, who knows,
Right.
maybe it's ancient aliens, but you become fixated. And, that's,
Yes.
that's the problem of scaling up. Like if you always scale up,
Yeah.
you can become fixated on
And
certain
that's why
things.
it's so good to have a fellowship, a practice that you're
Yeah.
involved in, which our friend and bandmate Jesse from American Dharma
Mm-hmm.
can tell us, as he's involved with the Zen group, Endless Mountain Zendo. And so, yeah, I forgot where I was going to go there.
He
But yeah,
mentioned,
so we have no respected experts in this wisdom tradition.
and particularly with the psychedelics, which he mentioned they are dangerous for, like, say, like, well, I'm gonna teach myself and gather the knowledge for myself and do that. We've all seen that if you've been part of the festival scene or the psychonaut grouping of people or the experimenters and triers and all that stuff, you'll see people that go really far into it and they become like, wow,
That's
like
it.
all this stuff, but nothing they're talking about makes any actual sense, but it feels like it makes sense to them.
Yes. But in a fellowship, we can help each other
check
tune,
each other and be
tune
like,
in
yeah,
and
dude,
see-
you're a little out there. Like,
we
check
can
this
refine
out.
and
Yeah.
calibrate our non-dual state.
Yeah.
Our relation of self with the world.
And we can help this enhance this reciprocal relationship, or this reciprocal action that's happening within the altered experience as well.
Right.
Having people there
Yeah.
too to, like, is this real? Is this real? You feel that? You
So
understand?
Sangha, church, communion, fellowship, satsang, it's all very, very important for us as a species. In fact, every single culture that we look at in human history, when we go back, we see that they all had very deeply intertwined sacred traditions of passing along wisdom and achieving higher states of consciousness within the membership, within their members. And we have certainly lost that.
Well, we've been talking about this. I don't know if we've talked about it on the
So
cast.
time to rebuild.
But yeah, like the coffee shop thing, bring that back. Bring back where you can actually, like, places where you can talk about things like this, like reclaim your pub, get a table in the middle of the day at the pub and talk about meaning and life and gaining wisdom and stuff like this. We used to, that's what the public houses were for, or like the men's club. Men would, get around, lift weights, and talk about stuff. That's
Right.
what they.
Well, town
that's what
squares,
they did.
you know?
Or town squares.
Town squares,
In
the commons,
in-
common areas. We got to reclaim our common areas.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, and start discussing things like this, opposed to like, yeah, did you hear what the Kardashians are up to?
And perfect our wisdom traditions. If you're going to approach a plant medicine,
Yeah.
disclaimer, don't break any laws, but make sure that you're approaching them with a sense of reverence. Treat these substances as sacred as they are, as if you were going to a Buddhist monastery or to
Catholic mass, or
Catholic mass. Exactly.
or if you're going to Mecca to see what they're doing there. Like I was talking with my brother yesterday.
Yeah,
and he
go
was
with an intention. Do it
like-
prayerfully. Do it,
Yeah.
and don't do it like in a party atmosphere. Do it somewhere safe. Get your set in your setting, meaning the setting that you're going to be doing it in. Nice, clean, optimized blankets, pillows, good music, things ready, and also your mindset should be prepared for this thing. And don't do so
ultimately,
after like a traumatic experience. If you just had a breakup or something, wait.
unless you're willing to do the work.
Yeah, you
and
might
you're
still
going
wanna wait a
into
couple
it
weeks
knowing it's
because
gonna hit you.
take over. Yeah, you
Yeah.
want to be in a good mind state because it's going to be heavy.
Well, you could,
You got heavy stuff going on at that time.
if we
Now, if you got to work through some stuff, but let it sit. Let your body go through it.
don't work
through its
on your
normal
personal stuff
motions.
at the party,
work on the high level stuff a little bit after you've done your.
Well, a lot of our celebratory traditions, if we had, let's just say like a culture of wisdom tradition tied to mind altering practices, those parties are where you do the things, and you would, like, depending on the event that you're going to, like if it's a celebration of feasting and togetherness and warmth, like the winter traditions, that's what you're getting out of the whole experience, and you're learning to love your family and bring a deeper connection. But it's still a party, you're still drinking and hanging out and doing whatever people do for their whatever party. But then there's other celebrations that are, some are more reserved, like Easter. Like if look at that, that's more of a reserved holiday. It's still a feasting holiday, but I don't get drunk with my siblings on Easter. Whereas like Christmas is sit down, have some beers, eat a bunch of food. Like
Yeah, it's never as big a feast holiday,
but
as
it's
the
more of a
fall,
reverence
autumn
holiday.
holidays.
This is when
Celebration
Christ
of
came
the
back.
rebirth.
Yeah,
When the birds and the bees and the bunnies and
Well, and then
everything
there's
starts to
there's the
procreate.
May Day festival. That's all about being merry, and I'm fairly certain the culture that came up with the May Day festival was also eating some funny things while they're doing it.
Oh yeah,
I've hung out with a lot of we'll just say quote unquote pagans.
we know all the humans before us have, and they've done it for tens of thousands.
If it's
hundreds
there,
of
we're going to
thousands
eat
of
it.
years.
That's just, if it doesn't kill us,
Probably
we're going to eat it.
millions of years.
Yeah,
Really.
the stone ape theory.
Yeah, most definitely.
Bill Hicks
I
interpretation.
mean, we've been hunters and gatherers for such a long time. Yeah, we know all the local flora and fauna very well, and we know what's magical and what is not. And we certainly perfected the use of these sacramental, magical fruits of the planet over many thousands of years. And many other ways of achieving those higher states, because we also do have the DMT. Endogenous
Well, I
within our
think
own brains and
probably
bodies.
even like times of, like when the weather was harsh and it's hard to find food and you're on, like you and everybody else is on the brink of starvation and having to walk for a long period of time because the microclimate where you're at has changed.
Yeah, right.
Doing the long walk while you're starving and needing water will put you in another state too. So even, it's almost like our biology is geared as a survival thing to put us in these altered states when we
It is.
need to, and then we figured out how to do it for ourselves, and now we're figuring out ways to do it optimal. And by now I mean like for the past we've been Homo sapiens growing stuff in the ground. We've been doing it with intention now. And it's like, okay, well, I notice I kind of get higher than things when I go on a really long run, and I'm constantly running, I'm exhausted, I'm constantly running.
Oh, I mean, the athletic flow state's probably a combination of like adrenaline and tryptamine.
Yeah. You get, and then imagine that on top of like your body's already pumping in endorphins because you're a little undernourished, and maybe you're like really fatigued, so your body's putting the feel good chemicals to deal with the fact that like your whole body's screaming at you to stop.
Yeah, right.
And so humans will figure out a way to get high one way or another. Yeah, and by that I mean get into a higher state of understanding, get high that way.
Yeah, because that's what we're doing. We're breaking frame. We are interrupting our thought pattern with disruptive strategies, and Vervaeke is about to go into that now, and how that's helped the neural network AIs that we're working on to actually be able to. It's helped us perfect them and allow them to work better. As we're introducing static, we're introducing randomness, and that's why in the last episode we discussed, or Vervaeke discussed how our brains like lose their train of thought, how we get distracted, how we have trouble focusing on anything for a long period of time. It's actually healthy for our brains to do that. It's useful for them to do that. It's allowing them to introduce static, introduce randomness, and then return, so that we have to reframe the thing, and we keep on reframing, and each time we're doing that, it's like we're refocusing and we're getting a better fit on it, better understanding of how to tune into this particular thing that we're looking at. So yeah, I think that covers that first 15 minutes or so there.
Yeah, and where the last part where we're at is where we started with love is mutually accelerating disclosure.
Yes.
And this idea of knowing by loving, by constantly accelerating disclosure of
self-revealing disclosure in a coupled fashion. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And we need community more than ever.
No doubt. We do indeed. All right, guys, we're jumping back in now to John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, Higher States of Consciousness, Part 2. This is episode 12 of the series.
Now, what I want to suggest to you is that some recent cognitive science research can give us some understanding about why this decentering and this transformation of the sense of self might be functional here. There's a lot of work. I would recommend to you the work of Suey and Humphrey from 2015, for example, showing that one of the functions of yourself, right, not your mind, but yourself, is to act as glue. This is a term they use. It's a metaphor. By making things relevant to myself, I can make them relevant to each other and glue them together. So, and I'm always doing that, right? I'm simultaneously gluing things together as I'm gluing myself together. What the self is a powerful set of functions for integrating, actually complexifying processing. To say you have a self is to say you have a systematic set of functions that are integrating, not homogenizing, complexifying things together. Now, if you remember, we talked about the work of Michael Anderson, acceptation, the acceptation of the tongue. Here's a proposal to you. This powerful machinery that is central to your cognitive agency, your ability to make sense of the world by gluing the world together as you're gluing yourself together, this powerful machinery of complexification of information and information processing can be exapted. What if you were to take all that machinery of integration that you're using to integrate yourself and you turned it onto the world? What if you took all of that capacity to glue things together and you exapted it on the world? Well, that would mean that machinery that was normally self-focused about integrating the self and integrating its processing could be used to achieve a deeper integration of the world, to reveal deeper underlying patterns. Vervaeke in 96, Glaxton in 2000, both suggest, with argumentation and with phenomenological evidence, and many reports from people who are undergoing mystical experiences seem to corroborate this, that what seems to happen is all of the energy and machinery that has been bound up in our self has been turned onto the world. That's why the world comes alive to us, and we see so deeply into it. Imagine the intimacy you have in your self-knowledge being turned on to the world. So all of that energy that's stored up in your egocentric processing, all the time and the resource, and all the, who am I? What's going on? Oh, how's it? Oh, how's this? Well, relevant. All of that. Imagine if you could take that machine and say, forget about John Vervaeke. Just for a while, even. Turn all that massive machine onto the world. Radical decentering, I propose to you, is doing exactly that. All of the time and effort and processing and skill and memory and structures that we've built into our ego can be exapted to disclose the world. And that, of course, would be coupled with a radical sense of moving into the being mode and a radical sense of remembering who and what we really are. So, what I've tried to show you is we can understand the higher cognitive process at the psychological level in terms of this decentering, the exaptation of the self-machinery, flowing optimal grip, right? Enhanced awareness of invariance, both in the positive sense and in the ability that allows us to pick up on systematic error. We can see why this machinery is operating and producing the experiential profile it is producing. What about at the information processing level? I don't want to get very technical here, but this is the level at which we turn to work that's being done in machine learning, artificial intelligence, where people are actually trying to make machines that make sense of the world. And what kind of strategies do they come up with for trying to get the machines to be better learners? Well, one interesting thing is precisely the use of disruptive strategies. So Woodward et al. In 2014, this is a direct quote from them, right? I'll give you the quote in a sec. They introduced randomization into a neural network. A neural network is a very powerful and cutting-edge form of artificial intelligence that in some important ways mimics how brains work. And when you're training these neural networks, you don't program them, you train them to learn for themselves, right? But very often what you have to do is you have to introduce noise, entropy, randomness into these networks. In fact, he goes on to say that such randomness, quote, is an essential aspect of the self-optimization process. You have to, these are not people doing psychology, these are not people trying to understand higher states of consciousness. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make neural networks that learn better, that can self-optimize, and what they say is essential, that's the word he used, to this is disruptive strategies. Why? See, the problem with powerful machines is they pick up on patterns. And you say, well, but John, that's good. Isn't picking up patterns good? Well, remember all the stuff we've talked about when we talked about implicit learning and picking up on only correlational patterns, not picking up on real patterns. See, the problem you face is you're always sampling from the world. So here's your experience, and then here's the world. And there's some pattern in your experience. And what you want to know is that pattern in the world or not? We invented a whole discipline to deal with this. It's called statistics. All statistics is basically this problem. How do I know if the patterns in my sample are the same as the patterns in the world? How do I know that? Right? So, for example, if I was in class at U of T and let's say it's an even huge class, 500 students, Psych 100, and I say, how many people here think that student tuition should be reduced or school should be free? And they all put up their hands. Should I then conclude, look, the overwhelming majority of people think that student tuition should be reduced? You'd say, that's ridiculous, and this is what you should say, because that is not a representative sample. The pattern there is all students. You need the sample to have the same patterns as the environment. So why is that relevant to disruption? Very often, what will happen with these neural networks is they will overfit to the data. They will too tightly pick up on the pattern in the sample, a pattern that does not generalize to the rest of the world. So let me give you a way of understanding this graphically. So very often, right, we're like, you've been probably taught this, right? You do a scatter plot, you point your point, right? And then you don't typically draw a line like this to try and capture the data. Instead, what we typically do is a line of best fit, which might not touch any of the data points. This is called data compression, the line of best fit. Why do we do that? We do that in science because what we're trying to find is the function that will generalize, that will go to all kinds of different contexts, that will not be true just of this sample, but will be true of the population. But what the networks do is they do this. They overfit to the data. They track a function that perfectly describes the sample, but does not generalize to the population. Precisely because they're so powerful, they overfit. So what do? Well, you can throw some noise into the system. You can turn off, you can do dropout, you can turn off half of the nodes. You basically disrupt the processing a lot. Because what the disruption does is it prevents you from overfitting to the data, and it actually allows you to compress. And what does the compression do? It allows you to find the real invariants, the real patterns that will generalize across all the varying contexts. Now, of course, right, You don't want to underfit. If you underfit, then you're not picking up on any patterns at all. So notice again, these systems have to toggle. They have to toggle back and forth. They have to disrupt, right? Very analogous to breaking frame in order so they can make a better frame. And they're trying to find that sweet spot between disruptive variation and compression to detect real patterns that allows them to become good learners. So what we know is that, again, you have to have disruptive strategies set within powerful pattern detection. That's exactly what we're seeing at work, as I mentioned to you, in these people that are pursuing these higher states of consciousness. It's also, again, why belonging to a tradition that can afford powerful pattern detection, introduce disruption when needed, and guide you to help toggle to find the sweet spot is very, very important. If you want to be really good at jamming, and you have to have the requisite skill. Jamming without jamming without skill just gives you junk, doesn't give you jazz. So what's going on in the brain? So notice what I'm showing you here. The machines are doing, right, the compression. That compression is, right, that toggling of attention that you see going on in the higher state of consciousness. They're disrupting and then compressing, and they're trying to find the huge invariance patterns, but they're trying to break frame, and they're doing stuff that seems, I think, plausible to say is analogous to what we see going on at the psychological level within people. What about at the brain level? Well, this is where we have to turn to Newberg, because he's done most of the work on tracking brains as people are having these kinds of experiences.
All right, before we jump into Nuremberg.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we'll talk about why decentering is useful. And the functions of the self to like act as a glue that makes all the things relevant to our sense of self kind of packaged together in our awareness. This allows us to integrate and complexify our functioning, and that again generates the sense of self. So it gives us cognitive agency, but this can be exapted. This could be exapted from just focusing on the self in a self-centered, egocentric way, like our typical functionality, not even in like the excessive, like egoic, ultra proud, like sense of self-centered, but just the typical mode of thinking. We're very self-aware and self-focused. Of course,
it's
to keep
the
the
work
body
that you
alive,
do on
seems
yourself.
the natural function, but yeah, the human being is actually capable of this allocentric mode as well, that high-level practitioners of various wisdom schools and meditative arts can actually employ and embody very well for us. And that's the capacity to connect from, not from the self-focus, but from a deeper integration with the world and its underlying patterns. So now we're taking all of that machinery, as Vervaeke described, that helps us describe this sense of self and allow us to connect things that are relevant in our field of awareness together. You can use that on the world to reveal its underlying patterns. And this comes with a deep sense of intimacy and disclosure of reality, a sense of communal reality with the world. You feel this sense of oneness and integration and interconnection.
Yeah.
So this is a radical sense of remembering the being mode when one is in this state.
And we as a species have a pretty good understanding of how to understand ourselves. We've been developing that for a long time. And so we have a good tool set, and all we got to do is be able to turn it outward onto the world to understand the world just as intimately as we understand ourselves. And not and it's a back and forth too. It's the the toggling between, you gotta think, like, you have to do self-centered thinking because you're a self. So you center your thinking on yourself, get that right, then move out into the world with the understanding of now that you have the world, then you can turn it back in, and then like reverse
Can learn to
exact
reverse it and
then
operate from the being mode
yeah,
allocentrically.
yeah, and then gain insight within the self, and then turn that back out, and then gain insight about the world, and then turn that back in, and then gain insight about the self, and then turn that back out into the world. It's the non-dual scaling.
Yeah, well, it's staying there in that perfect middle path that is like an allocentric realization and understanding of, because we're remembering what we really are, is the feeling, the deep sense of it, the coming home feeling of it, the extra sense of reality to it is all coming from that. And this radical sense of remembering what we really are allows us to increasingly be in us, if one is cultivating this practice, this art, this way of being that is natural to us, but it does require our attention and our care. This can be an ever deepening state, and even when the body is into having mode, one is in this allocentric mode, being aware of that with kind of a loving grace, watching what is happening within the body. At least that's what we seem to see, and
that would be
the very high level sages and masters of
that
our
would be
past.
the ideal. Even if you don't hit for it, like hit that, it's still something.
And
you
see that in our
choose
elders, like
towards.
their increased levels of patience, even compared to their children with their grandchildren when they're interacting. You can see that gained wisdom of that life experience in a more allocentric, less self.
Well, it's almost like
way.
If it's turning the ego into what it should be, which is a tool to be used to understand from a separate perspective. So we're not just all one being all mashed up. You do have the self, the self, like if you're to like have the world, and then the self ego would be within the self realm, or self would be in the ego realm, but ego is a tool we use so we can have this conversation and watch this guy here doing this as three separate beings, opposed to just one soup. It almost allows for more potentials, more complications, more information to interact as more things become more things, and more aware of each other in these things, and then more aware of themselves, and then realizing they have to like not just figure out themselves or just the other thing, but also the world that both things exist in, and then all the other stuff, and then cascading enhancements and enlightenments all at once. And when you're in these higher states of consciousness, particularly through things like psilocybin or LSD or DMT, they almost, I don't want to say put it on overdrive, because it's not like an overdriven thing. It's just happening faster and more graceful, and the insights start cascading on each other, and you don't have to intellectualize them to understand them and have them revealed to you in the moment. It's like
deep chains
of
like,
I remember
that are
that,
interconnected and build upon one another.
I remember that, and remember that, what was it? Okay.
It's like, what if God is infinity, and the only way to achieve the experience of infinity, to rejoice in the experience of its infinity, was to create this multiplex of positions of potentiality from infinite different positions and perspectives, and so it shines its awareness like that great analogy of the crystal and the light from within the crystal shining out its many different faces, each one slightly different and unique, but from one and the same.
Well, I guess, for that it does require.
How does it experience love, and how does infinity experience infinity?
I think it has to first shatter itself, which is like the introduction of the idea of separate things, and then it has to work its way back into oneness again through those separate things.
Realize all of the complexity and the depth and beauty of love through the realization of the growth of it, and growth into it through deepening and deeper states of communion and interaction and appreciation. And how many different ways love can be felt, from animals to humans, with all our different personalities and unique circumstances, and how the moments play upon themselves to build into these moments that we remember for the rest of our lives, that create whole families.
So I was having a thought earlier.
It's the holidays.
Yeah, so you'll see people. Yeah, I've been watching people. People get a puppy and this, that, or the other for holidays because, well, I like cute cat videos and stuff like that, and it's the holidays, so you see it. But I noticed that people cry for two reasons: either you're very sad and in a lot of pain, or you're really happy and it's way too much for you, and you break down and start crying.
Yeah. What is
so
that
it's
excruciating good feeling? I love that.
Well, that would be,
I
like
get that
love.
from books and
that
movies.
would be one of the pure forms of love.
That's joy.
That's joy.
It's the
but
good.
it's so good it
like
makes you,
your
cry.
body is just celebrating the good.
Well, and that's why you get like weepy-eyed when you see like, kittens being rescued.
That's when you know you're
and,
tuned in too. That's just like the response you get from the
Mm-hmm.
universe when you're tuned in. All of a sudden you are in concert with it, and it rejoices with you. And there's like this key.
Wait, it
turn.
rejoice, like
rejoice, yeah. See what we did there?
yeah. Vervaeke, this is your
Thousands
fault.
of
I'm gonna
years
keep
ago.
doing this with words.
Language.
Yeah. But yeah, I bring that up too because it's like when you're talking about love and all of its expressions and the way it feels, like ultimately, like we have emotional display mechanisms, smiling, frowning, crying, and stuff like that. And some of them, like, smiling, frowning, and other things are to communicate with other people. But like crying is unique, and crying happens either with intense love and joy, or intense pain and the losing of love.
Yeah.
So hey, let's figure out what the crying mechanisms for. Because as far as I know, as far as crying when they're sad, I think humans are pretty much it. Most animals, if they have tear ducts, will cry because there's stuff in their eyes or there's something wrong with them. But humans, we
Because
shed.
we're social. We're such cultural. That's our superpower is our cultural
Yeah. No. Well, it ain't claws.
way of being together. Yeah.
Yeah, but
No, it's our capacity to come up with it and develop actual cultures and deep senses of interconnection through our music and our arts and our language and yeah, we've been interweaving our cultures for so long too.
yeah, and it's almost like
Everything has an earthling flavor and vibe to it.
yeah, we started out as one human culture when we were only a few hundreds of this weird ape that decided to be very not ape-like and do non-ape-like things.
Yeah.
And then there was a breaking, like, so, like a movement out from that. And then distinctions between them start happening because, some go more close to swamps and some are more in this area. And then eventually they all kind of develop to the same understanding. And now we're somewhat hominid and we start engaging with each other and we come together, but then we start moving out again. And then we come back together, and then we start moving out again.
Well, we were
so
like
we're
12
like
or
we
more
make and
different
break
species at one point.
we make and break
intermixing.
we make and break cultures like out of like necessity. It helps it grow, like because then we came to a near extinction level as Homo sapiens sapiens, and so there was only a few people scattered around. So those were centralized cultures that then spread out, became their own unique cultures, then all merged together into a super culture, but then spread out again, and then started blending with other ones. And it's like making them and then breaking them apart and spreading it out and then making it again. It's very much like how flowers do.
Yeah.
Like
Like all of life.
or like dandelions.
Yeah.
We just
The way it
and then
fractals
and then
out.
again and then come together.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just, that's another reflection of that reciprocal toggling between two things, but on like a evolutionary scale and then a cultural evolutionary scale too. So what we're doing within our minds and then trying to do to understand the world, we're also doing over long periods of time with culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, As people move, that's what we do. We move around. And when there was a lot more world and less people, it was more straight lines. But now we're doing these movements around, and even our ideas and thoughts and like fads and other things do this very cyclical. Instead of just one direction, go in this direction, you see like things looping back around. You can see this in like the kids' fashion too. It's like this weird like tinge of the 90s is starting to touch things again, just ever so slightly. and it's just all kind of.
Yeah. Well, if you imagined all of our different cultures as different instruments coming into a room and then inspiring one another and learning to play together, that's kind of what's been happening the last few thousand, especially the last couple 100 years.
Well, it's interesting that
especially the last 20 years once you throw the internet into the mix.
Oh, yeah. Well, you mentioned instruments. You can actually trace the cultures and migrations of people through what instruments that are traditional to them. Like what we think of as the guitar has had a very, well, there's two movements from India into Europe musically, but so it created this kind of looping, and we got things like, the dulcimer or excuse me, the lap dulcimer and other dulcimer, and then the mandolin and things like that during those migrations. But what ends up happening is people start using them together, and then what works, they start using more, but then they start modifying things, and then new instruments pop up for a new need. Particularly, like the bass end of things. So how do you build this thing that has the low end on this? Because now we got this, and we got this, and it's
going from upright bass to electric bass.
Yeah, well,
big drums.
even before that, there's I forget what it's called, but it's an African instrument, and you hold it like this, and there's this big barrel gourd, and it's got long strings, and you play it with your thumb, and it's kind of like a bass banjo, if you could imagine something like that. And it's a really interesting sound, but they come because multiple instruments come together. What works, they work on. What doesn't, they either modify. And there's instruments we don't use anymore, like the harpsichord. Hardly anybody, unless you're playing specific period music, uses the freaking harpsichord. That's it's just a just
the
thing.
organ, the big church organ.
Oh yeah. Well, those are just unfeasible to have, but you can also
But
now we got technology, so you can make all the sounds anyway. So if you want it, so that's where everything's homogenized down. Actually, musically speaking, now you can do it all from a MIDI controller. But now there's a bunch of different kinds of MIDI controllers, so you can get more expressions and play it a little differently and change how you play. And now there's toys to plug into them, so it's centralized down and then expanded back out again.
You still have to have the building shaped to get the level of acoustics that you get in those ancient cathedrals.
Oh yeah, a real church
the
organ
fidelity of the actual,
but you can't
wooden pipes.
You can't really record that accurately to the experience of being in there, though. That's one thing. Our recording's still not good enough for even down in Harper's Ferry, that church down there.
There's aspects of it that you're feeling.
Yeah, no, you literally feel it through your body and in your
body,
head,
and you're hearing in ways that you don't understand. Yeah.
And it creates a frame breaking, disruptive experience.
Oh, show.
I think that was the intention behind designing churches with that sound effect, because when you get hit with the pure voices and what the human voice can do, then in an environment that reflects it really good, you literally start like weeping and going into a mode here.
Yeah. Well, those are finely tuned experiences that we're building, and so we've kind of let these arts fall into decay. Yeah. But it is about it's about that time for us to be doing this process of rebuilding, breaking apart, rebuilding.
We need radical decentering.
We need radical decentering now.
Radical Oh man, okay, dude.
Right. But yeah, let's we're definitely jumping off on tangents here. Let's get back.
Sense making machines.
So yes, the machinery bound up and the building of the self is being turned to the world with that level of intimacy to disclose reality. The reality of the world, and be in that being mode, sense of remembering what we are with the world as the world itself, and the enhanced awareness of the invariance of systemic error that comes with this, the disruptive strategies that we utilize allow for randomization into our patterns of. It helps us fine tune our sense making of patterns in reality and within ourselves. Now we've turned this into AI, and he goes off on a tangent there talking about AI a little bit. We get into statistics.
Well, real quick though,
jump in with anything here.
Yeah, so like on the AI and the problem with machines, well, so what they have to do is they're introducing variations, so a way to disrupt, whether it's chaotic noise or an entropic signal or whatever.
Just how ourself with our sense of getting distracted
But
and then coming back.
we naturally tend to pick up, like, we do the average, the compression average, whereas the machine just wants to like hold on to each data point.
It wants to get that pattern perfect. Yeah.
But in
you have
order to get
teach
that,
it to do something that can be replicated in reality.
well, and what they're doing with these neural networks by introducing destructive strategies is helping the machine find out what the actual invariant distribution is.
Yeah.
Because when you, like, say, have
And to find a line that is a good equal measure between all of them that generalizes. So it generalizes. It's an optimization process.
and it would even, it would, when you say, like, give the AI a bit of information with 12 points, then take out 6 points in the next, then put some back and take out the other ones, then put them back. Eventually, it's going to get to the point where it's going to read that average line down the middle because of what's
so it
there
won't
and
be
what's
overfit.
not. Yes.
Overfit to reality. And you can also be underfit. So we need these disruptive strategies, such as mindfulness techniques, meditation, plant medicine, so on and so forth, because they are powerful pattern detection, optimizing art forms, basically. So, why, and now we consider why belonging to a tradition is so helpful in further helping us reinforce our pattern recognition and our disruptive pattern recognition framework. You got people that are helping you calibrate and fine tune it, that are experts at tracking and understanding where these mistakes can be made, where one veers a little bit off the path.
Perhaps the AI needs a sense of self, because we use self, the relationship between self and other things to gauge where we're at, and then step outside of ourself as well.
Yes,
which
the same
that's
process. So they're
kind of a
introducing
scary
that
thought.
into how our attention works into these self-learning neural network AI tools,
I guess,
to allow them to be better at learning. So yeah, they're introducing randomness just like we do
I guess what they're doing here
with our short attention spans.
without the self, they're not toggling between, like, self and the world. They're toggling between the compression. So the the line of generalization and introduction of noise.
Yes.
And that would be the toggling between the compressing of things and adding noise and
Yeah,
compressing
because it's
of
got to
things.
be accurate enough.
Yeah. So those would be
And it
that would
can't
be the
be too-
machine's parameters,
Yeah.
which
It's amazing how it learns to do it too, just like we do.
we should start really putting love into our machines a lot more if we're going to be getting AIs that are meaning making.
Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, and I think that catches us up. Yeah, he talks about compression, the toggling, and the toggling of attention to fine tune. And we will jump back in here now, or is it a good time to
Let's
take a quick break?
break.
Let's do that. All right, guys, go ahead, grab a drink, get yourself some Pop Up the Corn, and maybe a fizzy drink instead of a coffee. It's a little late for that, but if you got some hot chocolate, I say go for that. It's a cold night.
Or some
where we're
Baileys.
at. Some Baileys and coffee, indeed. That's how we warmed up our night this evening. There's your commercial, Baileys, for free.
Yeah, right.
You owe us in the future at some point in time.
Not sponsored. Not sponsored.
No, most definitely not. We're actually sponsored by Anchor.fm, though, on our podcast hosting network.
Yes.
Anchor is awesome. You can record your own podcast. You can also listen to some of the best podcasts in the world, just like Spotify or Apple. The cool thing about Anchor is that it allows you to also call in 2 episodes to a podcast that you enjoy and share your thoughts and questions. And then that can be introduced by the host of the podcast in another episode later on, so you can hear the interactions of guests and many other things. But yeah, if you are interested in creating a podcast, I definitely highly recommend checking out Anchor. It's a free app on the Apple Store and on Google's Play Store. So check it out. You can record right through your own phone or your home computer. And there's a free ad for you, Anchor, since you help fund this podcast. And we love you guys. What you can do to help us out, help us reach more people, is to like and subscribe and share this podcast with friends and family who you think would like some of the content that we're sharing here. We have guided meditations. I do these Wim Hof breathing tutorials. We've got a couple of those. We've got this series of Actuali Live that we do every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we review John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis 50 lecture series. This is a big project that we are undertaking right now that we hope to help, just kind of popularize, help share with the wider world and help raise awareness of it, because it's amazing work and it's very helpful, very relevant to our times today. So yeah, anyways, we're going to get on to break and we'll see you guys in like 5 or 10 minutes. Be right back. We back.
We back.
Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, oh. Whoa, oh, 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 whoa, oh, oh. We be jamming. Jamming without skill equals junk.
Yeah.
Don't chunk it up
Yeah.
when you're trying to lay down that phone.
Yeah, that's the me,
Whoa,
10, 15 years ago that you didn't want to hear. It's like, no, it sounds great. No, it's junk, bro.
It's a process that
You'll
we
get
must
that-
all
you-
go through.
you'll
The
get there.
perfection of our artistic endeavors. You'll get better.
Yeah.
Yes. Work at it. Hard
Well,
work equals.
And also higher states of
progress.
consciousness without developing the expertise in there is also junk and is hollow. So just,
good advice.
going through these rituals just
You're
because
not just
you took
doing this for sensory experience, like the way that we go after everything with our having mode orientation to life, which is useful when you need something to drink and something to eat. But this is more to enjoy, basking in beingness itself,
Yep.
and to allow oneself to disintegrate into the world, to surrender into this flow of existence itself, just to let go and to be, and allow the thoughts and the emotions and everything to come and go as they please, and realize that there is an orientation to life that is very akin to unconditional love that allows us to be in a place that feels safe and secure and home, and kind of transcends all the BS. You're aware of what's happening around you. You have less problems. You notice the judgments that come up in the mind, and you can choose whether or not to follow the different distinctions that the mind comes up with, and you can begin to think purposefully. Then we can become more attentive. So it's a capacity that we all have access to, and we've noticed the sages are such wise beings to us that they're as we are to children as adults.
So you use the term disintegrate, to diffuse. It's very much that you disintegrate and break down and then reintegrate.
And there's that reawakening, that sati, that rebirth.
It's like almost like defragging information on your computer. Back in the day when you used to have to defrag, but it would be this massive things all over the place, and then it would disintegrate it, break it down,
Isn't
and
that
then
a pleasing
reorganize
process
it.
to watch? That's
Yeah.
why people get addicted to organization and cleaning and things like that, tidying up,
We should make one of those
feng shui in that environment.
what are those games called? The whatever away from keyboard games where you just keep them running, or you just look at them and it's just an infinite defrag screen, and you have some powers that can help it out, and you're just like, I'm at 90% defrag on this level, man. And it's just
no skill involved.
It's like Windows 98 defrag screen.
That'd actually be a cool screensaver.
Actually, yeah, right.
That would be funny.
I was a fan of the pipes one. Going all over the place.
Oh yeah, yeah, man. Old school.
So we
Back in
ended
the
with
day.
talking about machine learning and how it has to toggle between not like self in the world, but data compression, which is the line of best fit, and introduction of a chaotic variation, a disruptive variation.
Yep.
And then that toggling between helps the machine to learn. And we are also the machine in this sense as well. We're just toggling between self and outside,
And all the ancient wisdom schools
and
meditative arts,
and toggling between the scaling up and scaling down, the opacity, transparency, as well as the everything and the single component.
We're utilizing disruptive patterns to perfect that opacity to transparency shift that our minds can do to refine our attenuation to reality.
Yeah. But now we're trying to figure out how to get machines to do it. God help us all.
And we're doing it.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Oh, but it'll help us learn more about ourselves ultimately. If we get violent, crazy AIs, I guess we are a violent, crazy species. But I tend to think we're more good than we're not. And I think
we do need some help understanding our place in the cosmos. Yeah, I like the idea. I was just thinking about this earlier when we were taking our break about what if we develop an AI modeled after like a bodhisattva, like modeled after like Ramana Maharshi and like Jesus Christ and the wisdom of Buddha and Aristotle, all woven together, and it is fed in all of this data from around the world, and it's helping us perfect ourselves and get along better, and it's fine-tuned for that to be its primary focus and intention. It's like its reason for being, and it just is focused on that, but it allows us to also tackle all different kinds of like crisis events and different challenges that we might be facing. And
it would probably definitely make a good predictive tool as well. So you could start to see where, like, if it had connection to like everybody's interaction with the internet itself, which is pretty much all the time now, it could probably predict when people are building up a little bit too much angst from things, and it's like, can actually see the pattern of that, and not in the way that we do it with like, crime statistics and other stuff like that, but on a deep personal level, and just like put out a warning of like,
with the outcome being like what is good for one and all, without killing any humans, please. AI, how do we solve the microplastics in the oceans? How do we live symbiotically within our local environments, and how can we be more self-sustainable as communities, so on and so forth? How can we develop integrated networks?
Well, and how can we be most interactive with each other as well, and not like interactive like on cell phone wise, but like optimally interactive between people too. Like if we're gonna have an AI, it's still, sorry future AI, but it's still gonna be a tool we're using, just as like, humanity and our perception of the universe and our consciousness, I think, is a tool God uses to propagate God, but once we create something bigger than ourselves, we're going to have to look at the world differently, because now we created something that is more than us. It's smarter than us. It's faster. It's better in all ways. And that's a humble check right there, being like, well, what is it that makes us special and makes me feel good about being me? If it's not me being smart or faster or better at a thing or this, that, or the other, the AI will be the ultimate smart.
Well, I mean, it's that you're part of the cosmos. You're an earthling. You're an extension of Earth. It's an allocentric realization. Yeah.
And I don't want to use.
And you have this unique perspective and these unique gifts to share. That without which there would be a void in the world. There would be a void in the universe that wouldn't have your unique gift, because only you can be you. Because we all fractal out a little bit differently. We can twist in all kinds of radically different ways. So let's jump back into it here.
Before I start freaking myself out with thinking about AIs and stuff. I lose sleep over this stuff.
Yeah, right. All right, here we are.
Seems, I think, plausible to say is analogous to what we see going on at the psychological level within people. What about at the brain level? Well, this is where we have to turn to Newberg, because he's done most of the work on tracking brains as people are having these kinds of experiences. And what you see is, initially you get increased activity in the frontal area and the parietal area. These are the two areas, the frontal-parietal connection, that is most associated with your general intelligence. your ability to make sense and get an optimal grip on the world, because that's what your general intelligence is. So initially you see these areas get hyperactive, and then you see the opposite. You see them hypoactive. So huge increase followed by a huge decrease. Now, throughout all of this is the frontal parietal, you have enhanced activity in the thalamus. This is the area of the brain that tries to integrate all kinds of different information together. The greater the shift, the greater the disruptive shift, the more powerful the awakening experience is. It's just like what's going on in insight. You initially bring all this machinery to bear to frame it, and then you have to massively disrupt it and break it. And then the system self-organizes, and that is precisely what's going on, I would suggest to you, in these experiences. So, what is happening in the brain, for example, in psychedelic experiences, is you'll often see this kind of shift. What's important, and there's a bunch of people doing work on this, metastability. So what, for example, psilocybin does, according to recent work done by Lord et al., is it increases metastability in the brain. So if you look at the work of Kelso, Tognoli, and others, what metastability is a state in the brain that's doing this complexification I talked about. So normally your brain is integrating things or segregating, integrating, differentiating. But in psilocybin, what you get is a state called metastability where, and this is a state in which the brain is simultaneously integrating and segregating. It is massively complexifying. Please remember, complexification is when a system is both integrating and differentiating. When you went from being a zygote to being a biologically complex organism, your cells were differentiating into different types of cells, liver cells, eye cells, etc., but they were also integrating. You are complex because you're both highly integrated and highly differentiated. Complexification gives you emergent functions. It gives you new abilities. You can do things as a person, right, a biological human being, that you couldn't do as a zygote precisely because you're complex. Look, emergent functions come to the fact, because I'm highly differentiated, I can do many different things, but because I'm highly integrated, I don't fall apart as a system by doing these many different things. I get new emergent abilities. The way you grow and self-transcend as a system is by complexifying. Psilocybin, by putting you into metastability, right, helps your brain complexify and come up with emergent abilities. It allows you to see the world, massive integration, in a grain of sand, massive differentiation. So, I think what we can see here is, at least highly plausible, and I'll come back to what I mean by that in just a minute, account at the psychological level, at the machine processing level, and at the brain level of what is going on in these higher states of consciousness and why they are so powerfully optimizing your cognitive functionality. Once again, not to repeat this, but that, of course, has to be placed within the proper sapiential context. You need a tradition and institutions, a committed community of cultivating wisdom. Now, what about the prescriptive argument? I've laid a lot of the groundwork for this. Why should we listen to people who have been in this state? Why should this state serve as the justification for a transformation of your life? If someone comes up to you and says, I want you to transform your life according to X, Y, Z, right? You need that claim justified, not just described, and explained, you need it justified. What would make it a good thing to do? Are these states actually good guides for transformation? Well, in order to do that, I need to introduce a notion to you first. We're going to come back to this notion again when we talk about the nature of cognitive science. Although I've been exemplifying a lot of cognitive science to you throughout these previous videos. This is the notion of plausibility. We need to talk about this because plausibility is central to your notion of how real things are. Now, there's two senses of the word plausible. One is a synonym for highly probable. That's not the sense I'm using. I'm using it in the sense that Rescher and others made famous, where this means makes good sense. Stands to reason. Right? Should be taken seriously. Most of the time, and I'll make this point in detail in a few minutes, you cannot base your actions on certainty, but you have to rely on plausibility. Now, there's a lot of work on plausibility, and I'm just going to try to sketch to you what I think, or work I'm doing with Leo Ferraro and Anderson Todd, about trying to integrate work by Lombardi and Nashman and Sinatra from 2015, Kyle 2006, Milgram 1997, Kischer, Rescher, I should say. There's just a lot of different work going into this. Here's what I think it is to make something plausible. First of all, it involves what Rescher calls trustworthiness. And I think there's an important way in which trustworthiness comes about. You can see this in some of the work that Kyle has done on explanations we prefer. We regard a particular proposal or a construct or some way of trying to model the world as trustworthy if it's been produced by many independent but converging lines of evidence. Let me give you a clear, concrete example. Right? You will regard as more real information that comes through multiple senses as opposed to one sense. If I'm only seeing something, there's a good chance that it's an illusion or a delusion caused by the subjectivity of my seeing. But if I can see it and touch it and hear it and smell it, then the chance is that each one of those independent senses are, right, producing an illusion is radically diminished. The fact that they all are telling me the same thing, now that doesn't give me certainty, but it gives me trustworthiness. It reduces the probability, that's what trustworthiness is, right? It reduces the probability that I'm self-deceived. Now, that's not the same thing as certainty, because, unfortunately, for example, there is a form of schizophrenia in which people not only hear voices, but they see people attached to those voices, and when they reach out to touch the person, they get a tactile illusion. And it's very hard to convince those people that their illusions aren't real, precisely because this is highly trustworthy. This is why science likes numbers. We like numbers because they allow us to converge the senses. Look, you can see 3. You can touch 3. 1, 2, 3. You can hear 3. We like numbers not because we're fascists or something in science. We like numbers because numbers, quantification, help us to increase the trustworthiness of our information gathering. They allow us to reduce the chance that what we're getting, what we're measuring, what we're modeling is being produced by self-deception. Is that enough for plausibility? I don't think so. So we're converging to some processing state here. But we also want something to be the case, because we're not just looking backwards into how we got there, we're also looking forward what we can do with it. What we want, right, is we want a model that we can now apply to many new domains, that will open up the world for us, that's multi-apt, right? This is like, again, taking a martial arts stance. I don't use this, but I'm taking this stance because I can quickly adapt it to many different situations. It's multi-apt. It's highly functional. So why do I want this, right? When I can use the same model in many different places, this is, I would argue, what people mean when they say a theory or a model is elegant. You can use the same model, right? It's adaptive enough, it's multi-apt that you can use it in many different places and apply it. So you have convergence for trustworthiness, but you have elegance for power, for multi-aptness, for multi-apt application. Is that enough? No, right? I think this state has to be highly fluent to you. Remember we talked about this. This has to be one that you can use readily, powerfully for yourself, that you can internalize. When you have this, when you have fluency, convergence, elegance, right, you need one more thing. You need a balance between the convergence and the elegance. If I have a lot of convergence without much elegance, that's triviality. The thing about trivial statements is not that they're false, they're true, but they're not powerful. They don't transform. Many times we reject things, we don't take them seriously, they don't make good sense to us, precisely because they're trivial. What's the opposite? Very little convergence with a lot of promise of power. This is when things are far-fetched. Conspiracy theories have this feature. If they were true, they would explain so much. If we would just accept that the British royal family were lizard beings from outer space, we could explain so much of their behavior. But the problem is, although that would be a very powerful explanation, we have very little trustworthy evidence that that is in fact the case. So what we want is we want that, as Milgram says, our backward commitments and our forward commitment match. We only commit powerfully forward if we've got a lot of trust in the model that we've produced. When all of this is in place, right, I think we find what we're processing not only fluent, we find it highly plausible. When we have very deep convergence and very deep elegance and very efficient fluency, I think we then find the proposal profound. So you're saying, why are you going on about this? Because what I'm trying to show you is what the brain is doing is performing a kind of evaluation of the plausibility of its processing when it's in a higher state of consciousness. See this model? What did we see? What did we see? We saw lots of things going into the higher state of consciousness. We saw de-automatization, right? We saw decentering. All of these things are strategies for reducing bias. Reducing bias. These are all strategies for reducing bias, right? De-automatization, decentering, fluency in processing. The state that you're in is a state of flowing optimal grip. It's intrinsically valued. It's optimizing for processing. And what's this affording, this state? Well, you're finding a nexus for development. You're finding that systematic error. You're getting that complexification of your processing. So you're getting emergent new functions. You're getting the acceptation of machinery, the insight machinery and the self machinery into new abilities. Do you see what I'm arguing? Your brain is in a state in which it's getting information that's saying this processing is deeply trustworthy, deeply powerful, deeply fluent, therefore profoundly plausible. Now, plausibility is not certainty, but plausibility is what we have to rely on. What do I mean by that? You can't get certainty for almost all of your processing. You have to rely on plausibility all the time. Well, you say, but I could turn to science. Science will give me certainty. Well, first of all, pay attention to the history of science. When has it ever done that? Almost all of the theories that have been proposed in science have ultimately turned out to be false in some significant or an important way. Science isn't believed in because it gives us certainty or facts. Science is believed in because it gives us self-correcting plausibility. Look, this is how do I decide what hypothesis to test? I don't test any hypothesis I come up with. I wonder if clipping my toenails will reduce famine in the Sahara. Let's test it out. I wonder if I gather enough frogs together, can I influence the Australian election? Let's test it out. Do you know how many hypotheses? And you say to me, that's what? Ridiculous. That's absurd. What you're saying to me is those hypotheses don't make sense. They don't deserve to be taken seriously. What you're saying to me is I reject them because they're implausible. Now I go into my experiment. I'm going to run an experiment in science. Well, what do I have to do? I have to control for alternative explanations. What we're always doing in science is inference to the best explanation. This goes to the work of Peter Lipton and others, right? Here's some phenomena. What I do is I have some candidate explanations for what's causing the phenomena. And then what I do is I put them into competition with each other. Which one of my hypotheses best explains it? And the one that best explains it, right, is chosen as what's real. But this, how would you make this certain? The way you would make this deductively certain is you would have to check all possible explanations. How many possible explanations are there? An infinite number. You can't ever make science certain because you're always doing this. This explanation is only as good as the competition it beats. In science, you advance by coming up with plausible alternative explanations that you beat with yours. Science depends on plausibility judgments. depends on plausibility judgments when we choose our hypothesis. It depends on plausibility judgments when we choose what variables we're going to control for in experiments. It depends on plausibility judgments once we're done and we have the data and we have to interpret it. What is the number of interpretations I can give for any data? Infinite in number. What do? I generate the most plausible interpretation. Before the experiment, during the experiment, and after the experiment, I'm relying on plausibility. Plausibility is indispensable. That's why your brain looks for it. So notice what we've got. This higher state of consciousness is an optimization of your processing. It brings about a state of high plausibility, and it's relying on processes that are fundamental, right? Because optimization has priority. I have to get my optimal grip before I can judge what it is. I have to zero in on the relevant information and have the right formulation of my problem before I can try and answer it. These higher states of consciousness, notice what I'm saying they have. They have indispensability because they run in terms of your plausibility machinery. They are optimal in terms of getting the best possible functioning for you. They are prior because they are fundamental to any and all of your cognitive processing. Getting this optimal grip, toggling between trade-offs, getting the best relationship between generalizing and discriminating. All of these have priority. These are why these states are such good guides. Again, if they're set within a set of sapiential practices, set within a sapiential tradition. Now, what I'm saying is these higher states of consciousness are great guides on how to transform yourself, how to cultivate wisdom, how to see through self-deception. But sometimes people come back from these states and they make pronouncements about the nature of the world. Sometimes these are bizarre. People will come back from DMT and tell them that hyperspace elves have told them that they should remain in forever inside their head, or some bizarre stuff. Here's the thing you should know about. The propositions that people generate from this are largely useless. You can read these reports. People will have these higher states of consciousness, and one group of people will come out and say, I know there's a God. Other people have these experiences and they come out and they're filled with joy and they say, I know there's no God. Diametrically opposite. Because this isn't about propositional knowing. This is about participatory transformation. This isn't about getting secret metaphysical knowledge. This is about getting wise practices, wise transformations. Ultimately, what we need to do is to take the wisdom from these higher states of consciousness and get it into rational discourse with an independently established, via our best science, metaphysics, best science and philosophy. When we can put those two together, then we will have properly salvaged what these higher states of consciousness can afford for us. Do not confuse the rationality of wisdom with the rationality of knowledge. So next time what I want to do is, now that we've got a preliminary account of what these higher states of consciousness, what the awakening of the Buddha might have been plausibly like, we can return to what did he propose specifically, thereby finishing off the axial revolution, our discussion, I should say, of the axial revolution in India, and then we will return back to the Mediterranean world and look at what was happening there after Aristotle. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you there, buddy. All right. Meow. Yeah, so
Yes.
when looking at the brain, I found this fascinating. You know, when we're looking at the brain going through one of these higher states of consciousness, you'll see the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe light up, which that's your actively thinking brain completely light up and go hyperactive, but then immediately drops back into your thalamus and goes hypoactive, and that's like,
and then back to hyperactive.
and the hypoactive end is how you store your information.
This is how our brains normally work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we notice enhanced activity in the thalamus during the higher states. And the more intense these shifts, the more powerful the experiences, and the more revelatory and insightful it is.
Yeah.
So the greater the insights, massive reframings, self-reorganizations. And we notice metastability is increased with psilocybin. So these two modes become interlocked and perfectly integrated. And that's why it feels like the brain turns all the way on. At least in that.
And when this happens, you get emergent function. Well, you get complexification of things, and then emergent functions out of these
everything's just flowing in this reframing process too. It's
and now why should we listen to those crazy guys that are like, yo, I ate some stuff off some cow poop, man, you wouldn't believe. I don't even believe. Maybe I do, maybe I why
well it's helping refine the brain's process that it goes through in optimizing its awareness and its attenuation to reality by taking the integration and the differentiation processes, optimization process of the brain, and it's utilizing them simultaneously. So there's this massive integration that is occurring.
Yeah. Well, and that's what it does. And I guess what we're going to be trying to figure out is like what justifies that experience. It's like, okay, yeah, that experience happened, but why listen to somebody? What's the justification for listening to somebody? It's, well, plausibility.
The plausibility, because it's allowing for increased complexification, which allows for new functions, new abilities, and that complexification equals growth.
Yeah.
And the emergence of ability.
And so we create plausibility, and we've talked about this in earlier episodes about like how you verify like information. So like creating plausibility,
so why does this justify change in our lives? Why is this plausible to us? How does this connect with our sense of being a vulnerable being that must survive,
or just for anything,
and
really
have meaning and feel integrated?
So the plausibility making is a convergence of independent lines of evidence, which so we're reducing our self-deception. So that's the converging end. Right. And then we go into something which is quite elegant, which is can your theory or your idea or your experience, like say like the psychedelic experience, can it be applied to multiple domains? And the word he uses is multi-act.
This higher state.
Yeah.
Is it multi-applicable? And allowing for high functioning, elegance, that multi application potential that you have, that gives enhanced power. The convergence
that's where the power of your argument
of reliable information, like how much we can have multi-sensory input, see, hear, taste, feel, smell. You get that convergence. You get that sense of trustworthiness. Fluency allows it to be internalized, or if something is deeply internalized, it allows us to act with that elegance, and so you get this balance between convergence and elegance. And the brain's evaluating its state of processing,
and if you
optimizing it in the higher states.
And if you have convergence without elegance, it's trivial. Nobody takes it seriously. It lacks its power.
That's right. Yeah,
if it can't be
too much to one or the other side, it must be balanced and held.
Yeah,
it's like tuning, not too tight, not too loose. Once again,
and then if you have the power, the elegant theory without the convergence, then you have something that is far-fetched. Yeah, it's a powerful argument, but you don't have independent lines of evidence that can verify any of it. So it's like, okay, those crystal skulls, have you read any information out of them? It's compelling, but like, has other people, like, have we hooked it up to the machines and done the thing? And whereas like with the psychedelic experience, we have both independent people coming together and being like, no, that. And then we can look at the brains while this is happening.
Yes.
And then these insights that people are getting from these experiences are applied to all aspects of their life. So now you have that harmony between both.
Right.
And that's why
Right.
you listen to the guy who's like, dude, I went on this journey, man. Like, you know, and this is kind of what I gained from it. That's
You
the
recognize some
justification.
inherent
is-
wisdom in his story,
Yeah.
because it allows for a de-automation process,
Yeah. And I,
which allows us strategies for reducing bias. So these decentering practices and fluency in these practices allows us to be in that flowing optimal grip with reality and increase that optimization process in a nexus of development where we're recognizing the disruptive aspects of reality, and having that revelation, that insight, that self-realizing, self-remembering, and allowing it to flow in such a way that the emergent new abilities become comprehensible and achievable. Things become profoundly plausible. So the way he's describing it, I was picturing it like, you know, like an ice skater, knowing that they have trustworthiness in their capacity, fluency in their ability, and so the trustworthiness from knowing it through their senses, through many times of doing it, the fluency of their ability and their dedication to their skill, their variant perspectival capacity for looking at the various ways that things can go. And so knowing how to fluently land it with power, strength, perfectly optimized, and do so in a way that is profound at the same time, like watching oneself do it. So they're in this high state of flow with life and existence, and this is a mode that we can calibrate our orientation to, and that's what these disruptive strategies help us do.
Yeah. And, you know, when it comes...
That's why the medicines are particularly helpful, and the higher states are particularly helpful for induce and to optimize further.
Yeah, it's so we're putting the importance of plausibility much higher than the importance of definitely, because, you know, science has always been wrong at some other point in time, and with science, what we're not doing is saying what is.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're participating in a mechanism that is a self-correcting plausibility generator, and then finding what's most plausible through, you know, like what he was saying, you know, like toenails and world hunger and stuff like that. It's like, well, it's absolutely ridiculous. We already know, because, well, we've been doing the science long enough to know that, like, there's like almost no chance that your toenail clippings have anything to do with world hunger or whatever.
Right. Well, that's because we test out the hypotheses. We have them compete against each other, and a hypothesis is only as valuable as the ones that it's beaten. Yeah. And so we work on levels of plausibility rather than certainty in science, and that's a great psychological approach to life as well.
And think of science as basically just inferring to the best explanation that we have right now with what we got.
Right.
You know, that's all science does.
That we have at this point in time.
Yeah.
But that plausibility is essential. It's that optimization process of finding plausibility in our experience in reality and existence around us is fundamental to our sense of reality and our sense of connection and meaningfulness and potential in that reality, potential for interaction. So the higher states are then, he argues, indispensable as they are optimal for priming that functioning and getting the optimal grip on reality. And this is all higher states, however one is having them. We're not arguing for psychedelic states versus all of them are in fact complementary. He also showed us in the last episode in the study that he brought up that showed that people that meditated, that, you know, the psychedelics plus meditation is of course an even more revelatory and insightful self-growing experience.
But one thing he did say in there that really stuck out is some/most higher states of consciousness experiences are largely useless. Like one person coming up.
Well, then no. Some people's explanations of what they are, are useless. Yeah, because
well, I know there's a God. Well, I know there's not a God. Well, that's functionally useless for our purposes of understanding in the world, like because it's not being verified from multiple sources.
The propositions that we make as a result of our experiences, the conclusions we come to are not. Are not reliable.
But
these practices are about creating more wisdom within our sense making.
We use our machinery that we use to generate plausibility to tell which of these experiences are, not definitely the most important, but most plausibly being important and being real and being integral. So it's like, I'm not knocking anybody that went and saw like space elves and stuff like that, or not knocking any of that, but how useful is that experience when it comes to making meaning?
Yeah. How many different perspectives can you see that experience from and be okay with it being viewable from multi perspectives?
And that's why,
and not having to subscribe to any of them. Leaving them all up there as potential. And you might have, levels of plausibility attached to some things. Like this thing felt so much like a guy in spirit that I really felt like Earth was talking to me. Well, in a way, maybe it was, because you are an earthling, an extension of Earth that is self-aware and dreaming and having this interactive vision.
That's where the importance of rebuilding wisdom practices and wisdom traditions again comes in, because then you can have these experiences and then gain more understanding of, not necessarily why did the Gaia spirit come to you, but what were you trying to grasp? What are you trying to understand? What is that mechanism, what is that? I hate to say it's like, what is that vision for? But really, what is that vision for? Why are you seeing, say, like a Gaia spirit? Are you particularly and what is it telling you?
What always seems to be attached to what he listed as what higher states do for us. They're helping you recognize bullshit. Yeah. They're helping you recognize wisdom. And deep interconnectedness, deep lessons and understandings that can only come through an experiential, like, grokking of that interconnectedness that is beyond language. I mean, you can write books trying to describe moments of epiphanies that happen in these states, and so that they afford such transformation and growth in our character. And our capacity to interact symbiotically with one another and the environment around us.
And we have
priceless.
So many different methods and ways to have higher states, to experience higher states. So, like, why not? It's not like the only way to do it is to eat this one thing, or to, like, go sit under a waterfall for 50 years. Or, it's like, well, you can do that, and you can do that. But you can also do this, and you can also do this, and do this, and do this. Because, like, humans, we're all really unique and have our own unique temperaments, but we tend to have archetypical portions of the or have temperaments grouped into archetypical, like some people are more head forward right on with their experiences, and then like maybe the people who do this, like the gazing into the sun for long periods of time while sweating and going through this horrible thing, but some other people are the sit on a log until you become the log.
Don't be sun gazing, kids.
Yeah, well, unless you're doing like the the sun dance.
Just like sunrise and sunset a little bit, but don't be staring.
Oh no, you don't like look directly at the sun, but like the sun dance where you get suspended from your chest. Well, not completely suspended, but walking the pole and in the sun, and
sound like a hardcore ritual.
That's a Lakota tradition, if I'm not wrong, but it's that gets you into a very deep higher consciousness state, like, but that's one method of doing it.
Did that with hooks hanging from their flesh too, like
no, they were hanging. It's actually like these little bone things, and they
there you go.
A friend of mine has done it many times, and he also has the hooks in the back, which symbolize another thing, but they've got the chest, the chest scars, and it's like, I'm not the brutal temperament kind for that. I find my transcendent experience in music and mushies and sitting on the log, becoming the log, and noticing the frog on the log that I also am, and now I am the frog. I used to do that a lot when I was a kid because I didn't have friends and I lived on a beautiful piece of property. So it was like you do a lot of sitting and just watching everything until you're not even yourself.
They're
You're
all
just aware of it all.
to the same
Yeah.
place, the same mountaintop, so to speak. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a couple guys in a temple playing a sitar and a djembe, or if it's the Lakota Sundance, or it's, you know, some Mazatec Indians tripping on mushrooms, or some Northern Siberians tripping on other mushrooms.
Yeah, right.
Or it's
Or combination
deep
of all
self-inquiry
kinds.
and meditative practices, and
Or even, you know, like the people
fasting,
who go on huge
dancing to exhaustion.
huge long hikes and stuff, like, you know, the Appalachian Trail people and stuff like that. That's like a slow burn way to do it. And every time you get to the top of a peak and you can really see out and you can see where you've been and see where you're going, and you get that overview effect again, and then back down into the trudging of it too. You know, there's
Very close
almost
to the
infinite
earth.
ways to get into higher
Much time for self-reflection as well. So there's this outer and this inner rejoicing that can happen.
I guess
Beautiful.
figure out which one's most plausible for you to be able to find useful. So whether you're the psychonaut end of things, or the self-physical punishment work through activity to get to this state kind of person, or the introspective meditation reflection kind of person, or any of the varieties
And combinations thereof.
Yeah, you know, because
Yeah, let's work on finding the great guides and teachers, and incorporating these practices studiously and in a way that we can develop our collective sense-making capacity further, our collective wisdom capacity further, and just refine these techniques of disrupting and reframing and optimizing our node networks of consciousness to tackle the greatest potential crises our species faces. We are here.
Yep. No matter where you are, there you are, and we're here.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We are here on the edge of the awakening. The meaning crisis is happening.
It's traumatic, but it's
identified
exciting.
We have identified what is happening to the human
Yes.
species, and we're going to continue on this series every Wednesday night, guys. So definitely join us, 8 p.m. EST. It's going to be on to episode 13, Buddhism and Parasitic Processing.
Yeah, I've been
Next episode.
been wanting to get to this one.
This is a good one.
All right, guys.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe. Share the show with your friends and family who you think might like it. But the best thing you can do is most definitely like, subscribe. And you can also find us on Spotify, Apple, all the podcast places. This live stream episode will be here for your enjoyment on YouTube, but it will also be on the podcast side in just a couple days. So you can listen there as well. And we also encourage you guys, check out John Vervaeke's work. He's got so many amazing ongoing discussions and projects going on. And, of course, check out Awakening from the Meaning Crisis yourself.
Yeah, and, you know, don't be afraid to have watch parties with your friends where you know, instead of going out to the club and listening to music, you go to the house, drink some beers, and listen to a lecture, and then talk about it and really get into it, and, you know, do what we used to do, you know.
Right.
Just get
This
together.
is something you can do as you get, older and hopefully wiser.
Yeah. Well,
We're going to take this thing on together, guys. Yeah. You could probably even bring your teenage kids into the room for this one.
no, sure, definitely. Yeah, even your little kids too. You know, they pick up on a lot more than
You can always skip our part if we're cursing too much for you guys, but please, expose.
We've been pretty
expose
good with
them
not cursing
to
too much.
John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Yeah. But we're doing it.
Yeah, we've been pretty good
You
about
should
cursing.
do it too. It's worth doing
There's
and
a few.
watching through, whether you watch us or you watch the original source material or both. This is
Yeah,
like,
we appreciate you guys going on this journey with us, though, and we hope you enjoy the commentary. And please do share your thoughts and questions with us as well, and we'll reply back in the chat.
Yep.
Indeed. Well, we love you guys. We will talk to you soon.
Meow.